Hello and welcome to the origins of Islam. Today we want to look at the Islamization of Spain, and at first we want to look at how it all started. And I've called this episode a Visigoth civil war because this is really at the root of it all. So to understand this, we first need to have a look at the Visigoths. Who were they and what does it have to do with Islam? So the Visigoths were an Eastern Germanic tribe who converted to Arianism around 300 AD. And if you remember, Arianism is another form of an anti-Trinitarian Christian denomination. Under pressure from Hunnic invaders, they entered Roman territory in the 4th century, where they became subjects to the Roman Empire. But after Roman soldiers massacred barbarian families who tried to assimilate, they rebelled and sacked Rome in 410 AD. This was a major shock for everyone at the time. For the first time in almost 800 years, enemy troops had entered Rome. They also took the treasures from the Jerusalem temple, which Titus plundered in 70 AD. After that, the Visigoths roamed through the Roman Empire and eventually settled in what is today southern France and Spain. By 500 AD, the Visigoths controlled most of Iberia, but were kicked out of France by the Franks. Now in Iberia, there was a problem, because the Iberian clergy was of course Catholic, whereas the rulers now were Arian. But even among the Iberian population, there were deep sectarian splits present. Centuries later, Charlemagne still fought adoptionist heretics in northern Spain. Now, in 589 AD, King Ricared I converted to Catholicism. He gave up on his Arian beliefs, and so did the high nobility together with him. Many believe that this was in part at least a political move. The ruling class wanted to get the clergy on their side, but they also wanted the approval of the Byzantine Empire in order for them to gain legitimacy as kings of Hispania. But immediately thereafter, there were Arian uprisings. So while the high nobility converted, large parts of the lower nobility didn't. And the Visigoths had a feudal system with very powerful local rulers. Several synods were held in order to push Byzantine theology, but among the nobility and also some of the bishops, there was a strong opposition against the Visigoth kings. And what we typically see is that every time when it comes to succession of a king, chaos breaks out. So typically there is a strong Visigoth king. When he dies, he wants his son as a successor, but the son then typically lasts only a very, very short time until he's assassinated or dethroned. Either a civil war breaks out or a conspiracy to murder the king. And then a new strong ruler comes in who manages to control the country. But then once he dies, the same thing happens again and again. So there's no continuity in Hispania, and there's permanent war and intrigue. Now let's have a look at the east for a minute. And we want to look at the Ibadis. Nowadays, the Ibadis are understood to be a specific Muslim sect, but initially they started out as Christians. They claim to be descendants of the Lakhmids, and they are attested in Hira before 400 AD. The Lakhmids were an Arab tribe that controlled southern Iraq and the eastern part of the Arabian Peninsula, as you can see on this map, and many Ibadi tribes have fully converted to this anti-Trinitarian form of Christianity by their time. The tribe of the Tamim has been the most important one among these anti-Trinitarian Christian Ibadis, and they were successful merchants. Many lived in Christian communities in northern Africa. Now, during the Byzantine-Sassanid War, large numbers of Ibadis came to northern Africa as auxiliaries of the Sassanid army. Many of them stayed there, and their descendants later joined Abd al-Malik's troops. Now, Ibadi anti-Trinitarian Christians were instrumental in the conquest of northern Africa, which took place from 660 to 700 AD. And they also spread their anti-Trinitarian religion among the Berbers. Now, even before then, many Berber tribes became Christian under Roman and Byzantine rule. But of course, they were mostly Catholics. But because of their tribal structure, it was easy to convert them to this anti-Trinitarian form of Christianity. All you had to do was to pressure the chief of any tribe, and then the tribe would follow. These anti-Trinitarian Berbers are then attested to for centuries to come. Back to Spain. In the early 8th century, the southern Spanish nobility and some bishops conspired against the king yet again. Those southern Visigoth nobles had territories in northern Africa, and they employed Berber troops as well as Arab auxiliary forces from northern Africa who were both anti-Trinitarian Christians. So what we're looking at anti-Trinitarian troops from northern Africa who supported anti-Trinitarians in Spain in their fight for the crown against the Catholic rulers. Only later did the auxiliaries turn conquerors when Umayyad forces under Musa ibn Nusayr entered Spain. So one possible explanation is that the Visigoth lords didn't pay up, so they hired these mercenaries and they didn't pay them, so they just stayed. Personally, I believe that it's just that the Umayyads saw their chance. They saw that their subjects, the Berbers, were the dominant force in Spain, so it was easy pickings for them to just move in and take over. Now, this Umayyad conquest of Spain took from 711 to 718 AD, which is of course later than in the oldest Islamic traditions, for example in Al-Tabari, who claims that this conquest happened during the Rashidun period, but nowadays there's absolutely no question. It's confirmed that this took place from 711 to 718. Still, this is quite a short time span to conquer a large country like Spain. It's not unprecedented, but very short nonetheless. If you think about that, you have to deploy troops, besiege cities, manage logistics, secure food, and all of that takes time. On top of that, campaigns were typically limited to summertime, again because of the supply issues. So 7 years sounds like a short period of time. At the same time, we have very little evidence of destruction, which is quite atypical for a military conquest of this sort. The way it is traditionally explained is that the inhabitants of all major cities fled into the mountains, leaving the cities to the invaders. That sounds extremely unlikely. However, once again, when we look at the coins, the primary evidence, we see a different picture. We see that new minting activities by feudal Visigoth rulers start. And we've talked about this already when we looked at Persia and how Persia fell to the Arabs. And something similar happened here. Minting coins is a royal prerogative, which means that when we see local rulers starting to mint their own coins, they no longer respect the authority of the king. This is clear evidence of, at the very least, a breakup, if not a civil war. So what really happened is the Umayyads gained power through alliances. It was a diplomatic victory as much as it was a military victory. Eventually they became the dominant military power. It started out with Berbers being brought in as auxiliaries for the rebellious Visigoths. But when the army of the Visigoth king was destroyed, only the Berber forces remained. The Visigoth feudal lords made treaties with the Umayyads once they got involved, presumably in return for some political concessions, but potentially also for religious reasons. As fellow anti-Trinitarians, they probably believed that they could get along rather well. And with that, we're at the end for today. In the next video, we'll have a look at the evidence which we have regarding the tipping over from this anti-Trinitarian Christianity in Spain into Islam in Spain. Until then, thank you very much for watching and see you next time.